for coming today to, I think this is our second guest lecture for the School of Architecture and Interior Design this semester. And we are very happy to have today as our guest speaker, Wandile Mthiyane. I've thought a little bit about how should I introduce Wandile, because a lot of you know him, and almost everybody knows Wandile. But I think that I want to say this: we're very proud of all of our graduates and the amazing work that they do around the world. Wandile does some very special and unique things, and he's been blessed with some very unique paths and opportunities. But he's also showed incredible persistence and faith in moving forward with those paths and in those paths. And so we thought, since he was here, I mean, we saw him not that long ago with our 50 students down in Eswatini, in Swaziland, but because he was in the area and he is engaged in some really interesting things right now in Chicago, which I'll let him talk about, we thought we should take this opportunity and invite him as an alumnus to present sort of what he's been doing since he's graduated. Because we hope that our students, whether they pursue whatever path that they pursue with the degree that they receive here and the education that they receive here, we hope that this talk can be of some inspiration to think outside of the box, do something that's maybe a little bit unique, but not just for the sake of being unique, but for the sake of serving people and their needs. And so, a lot of us have had working relationships with Wandile in different ways. I've been blessed to have Wandile as a student and as a collaborator. He took us all, down to South Africa with a group of students and some of my colleagues here, Professor Homanchuk and so on, to work on some unique projects with it, which I think you're going to learn about today too. And I want to put this out there for those of you who are undergraduate architecture students who are sort of still have several years to go. Some of the things that Wandile is going to share today about the work that he's doing in Chicago and so on, I think they put into perspective for me how the work that we do here at Andrews University, if we do it with mission foremost in our mind, and that we're doing it for the right reasons, the work has a power and potential to reach audiences that we never really dreamed that they could. And what that means is that the impacts can be exponentially much greater than we ever imagined that it could be, and all of that for God's glory. And so I was humbled by that. I hope you guys will be inspired by some of the things that he'll share today. And I'd like to encourage you to remember that you're looking at somebody who was here not that long ago, who has been able to, by God's grace and his own persistence, being able to do mighty things. Even though he comes from a small place. Small but mighty, that's something that we learned. So, without further ado, let's welcome Wandile. And, sorry, let's not welcome Wandile. He asked me to show a video, and then we welcome Wandile. Okay, so I apologize for that. Okay, so here we go.
What is home? I was born into an environment shaped by apartheid. And I've been struggling with the concept of home since I was a child. I want to give the next generation of kids the experience of home that I never had.
Ubuntu Design Group changes the ways we look at informal settlements, co-designing communities, and putting the people as the lead architect of their community and homes.
We believe that no one knows best where they're going to live than the person who's actually going to live there.
I never really had a place to call home. In a selfish way, I'm doing what I'm doing to find out what home is. Apartheid architecture pushed a certain group of people.
They've put up and pulled down RDP houses 4 times.
Into sort of the worst conditions.
These contractors that aren't really building proper houses. I mean, houses don't even last 5 years.
In government setting, there's a lot of people with money who come and throw money to the problem.
A lot of money is being wasted currently.
You've got to start seeing it as being something which builds from the bottom, because that is socially sustainable.
Why am I doing this?
use this video, a 9-year-old dancer, her teacher had been
That was part of the presentation. How are you guys doing today? I'm excited to be here. I walked outside earlier on and I had to run. I had to run back in because I felt like I needed a hip surgery just because of the cold. So that part hasn't changed. So today I'd like to, have a conversation with you. I don't want to give a talk, but I want to have a conversation with you. I feel like this is home, and some of you guys, know who I am and are familiar with some of the work that I do, and some of you don't. So I'm just going to give you enough context on the work that we do, but I just really want to have a talk. And I was speaking in Notre Dame yesterday, and one of the big things is that students came up to me and asked was, so how do we get involved? How do we use architecture as a vehicle to bring about change within our communities or within your community? How do we do that? And there isn't a lot of avenues for people to do that. And I think I just want to share my journey and my story and how I was able to maybe start that process, which I'm still going on, from where you guys are at right now to sort of where I'm at now. Maybe let's start with leadership. You guys familiar with these two dudes right here? So we've got Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King. I think, how many of you guys here consider yourself as leaders? Just raise your hand. Yeah. Cool. A few people, and even the people that raise their hands, are often very shy to raise their hands, right? And that's because, and I think that's where the problem is. We've fundamentally restricted the word leadership to the people who do almost impossible things. So a story is told by a guy who did a TED Talk in Toronto where he says he was working for this nonprofit and he was out at freshman orientation. At this very same orientation, there was a young lady who was coming in for a freshman orientation, and they were at a hotel just before they would get to the school. And she was very nervous about this idea of going to college, about meeting all these new people. And I assume she was probably homeschooled, so this was going to be a very new environment for her. And she told her parents, she's like, I can't do this. I don't want to go. I don't want to go to college. Let's try something different. And then the parents were very supportive, and they said, well, we support you and we agree with you, but let's just try and go to orientation. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, if at any point you feel like you cannot do this, just tap us on the shoulder and we'll go back home, right? So she goes to freshman orientation, and I'm not sure if you've gone to one of those big schools orientation, you're in line for different things, financial aid, etc. As she was standing at the freshman orientation line, she started becoming nervous and she was about to have a panic attack and she just wanted to quit. She couldn't do it. And as she was just about to turn around and tell her parents, let's go home, I can't do this chubby dude wearing a funny hat comes out, who was working for a charity such as Charity Water. So in promoting this charity to the freshmen, he was going around giving them lollipops. So he was giving them lollipops, and then he comes to the point where this girl was standing. She pauses a person before the girl and gives the dude in front of her 2 lollipops and says, give the beautiful lady behind you this lollipop. And when this girl recalls the story, she says she's never seen someone more terrified. So this dude takes the lollipop and without even looking at her, gives it to the girl. And just as the girl was embarrassed as well, so she took the lollipop. As soon as she took the lollipop, the dude promoting the charity turned around to the parents and said, she hasn't even spent 1 day in college and she's already taking candy from strangers. So 20 feet radius around, everyone just started cracking up. And it was at that moment that this girl realized that I actually want to be part of this community. I want to be in this place. And because of that one sentence, she stayed. And fast forward 4 years later, or maybe 2-3 years later, the guy who had given the lollipop was graduating. So a random girl runs up to this dude and he's like, hey, you probably don't know me. We haven't talked in 3 years, but freshman orientation, I was standing in line, terrified, and I was about to quit. But you came and gave me that lollipop, and you made that joke, and everyone cracked up. And it was at that moment that I realized that I wanted to stay. So I know you don't know me, but I just wanted to thank you. And this dude was amazed because he didn't even remember that story. He doesn't even remember that incident happening. And then the girl walks a few steps away and turns around and is like, oh, by the way, I'm still dating that guy. A year later, he was invited to their wedding. That lollipop moment changed that girl's life forever. And that's what leadership looks like, the daily leadership that we do. I don't know about you guys, has anyone had a lollipop moment where someone said something or did something or treated you in a particular way that's changed the trajectory of how you view things or how you do things? Has anyone had any experience of that nature?
It was my first day of high school actually, and I received my locker combination. I couldn't find my locker. It was a big school. I was lost. I was wandering the halls, and this guy came up to me, and I recognized him. He was the SA president. He was a senior. He was very popular. A lot of people liked him, and he just asked me, "Hey, you look lost. Where are you going?" And he helped me find my locker and figure out how to get it open or whatever. And I know that was whatever, maybe the principal told him, hey, you go help the freshman or whatever. It doesn't matter. The way that he talked to me and made me feel included really changed my opinion of the school and what that experience would be like. I think that moment really shifted my perspective of what my experience for the next 4 years would be.
And how many years ago did that happen?
Oh shoot, I'm a senior now, so it was probably 8 years ago.
So 8 years ago, and you still remember that experience. You see, it changed the way you look at the people at that school, it changed your environment, it changed the way you treat other people, I assume. So it's those lollipop moments, those daily leadership moments that really make an impact. I think it's weird that we celebrate birthdays where all you need to do is not die for 365 days. And yet we don't celebrate the people and the things that they do that shape who we are and who we become. So leadership isn't just about leading the civil rights movement or ending apartheid, but leadership is about how you live daily, how you impact others, and what footprint that you leave with the people that surround you. And it is through this principle that you start realizing how much you as a person are also a leader and how much impact that you are having or already have. So I challenge all of you, from now on, if someone has done something or said something to you, tell them, let's celebrate those people and let's celebrate those moments, because that's what true leadership is about. Talking about leadership, this past week, and that's how I'm here today, I am one of the Obama Foundation leaders. I'm part of the Obama Leaders Africa program. I am one of the 5 out of 400 leaders who were invited to Chicago to meet President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama. I promise I'm in that picture. I just got caught out. I just got caught out. So we're out in Chicago over the past week, and I was in a panel with John Ronan, who designed the Poetry Center in Chicago, and Bill and Todd, who are doing the Presidential Center for Barack Obama, which is going to be at the South Side. So our whole reason behind the panel was to talk about how to create civic places that foster gathering, that enable opportunities. And to me, this was a unique opportunity because in many ways, these are architects that I studied about whilst in school. So to be in the same panel and to share about my work was an incredible a privilege and a huge experience to then talk about how Ubuntu's work can then inform some of the decisions that are being made in shaping the presidential center on the south side of Chicago. And I think one thing that Obama has taught us is this idea of demystifying what leadership is. And he has focused his whole mission post his presidency in developing the next generation of young leaders. And I'm one of the programs that he's leading. And so one of the things that he mentions, again, in line with this point of leadership, is that he talks about his presidency and saying, when he was the president, he had a lot of interns, and these are interns who went to Harvard and Yale, type A, excellent people who would come and work for him. And at the end of each session, he would gather them all together before they would leave, and he would give them an opportunity to do a Q&A. And in this Q&A, they would ask all brilliant questions, but inevitably someone would raise their hand up and say, so how do I become president? Right? And that's a noble question. But when Obama looked at it, he's like, well, when I was 25, I wasn't thinking about how to become president. I was probably busy at Columbia chasing girls, but I was also opinionated in class, learning about Gandhi and looking at what Nelson Mandela was doing in South Africa and realizing how much less privilege they had than me, and then being inspired to want to bring about change within my community. And that's what spearheaded him to go back to Hawaii and tell his folks that even though he had a degree from one of the most prestigious universities in the country, he wanted to go to Chicago, the south side of Chicago, and do community organizing. And it was through community organizing that he realized that there were bigger avenues by which he was able to make a difference. And then he narrates the story saying that you can't change a city without being able to change a neighborhood. And you can't change a state without being able to change a city. And you can't change the country without being able to change a state. So he then advises the young leaders present at the Obama Summit and says, don't focus on what you want to be, but rather focus on what you want to do and what impact you want to make. Because you can work all your life and end up president and end up in that position, only to realize that, one, it's not as glamorous as you thought it would be. Maybe it's not as fulfilling as you thought it would be. And then you realize maybe you don't have the ethics to be president, or you don't have the tools to be president. So I think this was a very interesting summit that brings together young leaders who are changing the world in different spheres, and Obama is giving them the platform to continue doing that from their local community. The theme of the summit was how places shape who we are. And that really is our caveat to sort of the work that I'm doing and how I was able to get to a point where I'm invited by President Obama to talk about my work in Chicago. So talking about how place shapes who you are, I grew up in different neighborhoods, and one of the neighborhoods I grew up in was at one point in informal settlements, very similar to this one, where you can see that it's all joy and playfulness from the kids. And I remember as we were growing up in this particular area, we didn't have the most fancy toys, and just like any other children, we liked to play house. And in playing house, we didn't have houses which were big enough for us to play house in. So we were forced to learn from our parents and to draw inspiration from them to be able to be resourceful and gather scrap metals to build playhouses right next to our families' homes. You see, in my community, there was no architect because everyone was an architect and everyone built their own houses. So I remember me and my friends would gather scrap metals and leftover materials and put it together to build our houses. And these houses would fall on us, and then we'll try again and build stronger houses. And it was through that process that I learned the importance of being resourceful, the importance of working together, the importance of playing together. We'd all run to our respective homes. One would steal rice, another curry, and other spices, and we'll put it together and make a meal in our little shack house. Looking back, these were not the most fire-safe things to do, but the food sure tasted good. And it gave us pride to live in a house that we had built and to eat a meal that we had made out of stolen ingredients from our families. It was through these experiences that I realized that people living in informal settlements or low-income communities are some of the most creative individuals in the world. They are the only people I can assure you that if we all left this room and we left them here, they could turn everything in this room into a house. And then I came over to study architecture here at Andrews, which was a huge privilege and just a miraculous story for me to be able to get to this point. And the idea behind studying architecture in the United States was so that I could learn from an already developed country and draw some of those principles and combine it with the local ingenuity of people from South Africa and people from my community so that we could be able to build sustainable buildings which are based on local and contextual culture and architecture. And I remember whilst here I was very excited to be here. I was in Professor Moreno's class, freshman year, with a lot of puddle of water everywhere I was. Thanks to my Timberland boots for that. So I would study and pull all-nighters sometimes. As a freshman, I would study with Robert. And because we really wanted to learn architecture and we really wanted to be able to use those principles to go back and change our own communities. Second year, still studying. And then third year was very interesting to me. Third year was the year where I mentally checked out because in some ways I felt like a lot of the architecture that we were doing did not reflect the architecture that I had come from. I felt like the people within my community wouldn't be able to even not only see these buildings in their lives or enter into them, they wouldn't be able to relate or live in them just because of the sheer cost, whether it be nice mixed-use buildings in Chicago or in different places. And we hadn't gotten to the urban design studio where we get to do a little more of social impact. And I remember I was running programs such as XXX against date rape on campus, and I was doing everything and just barely attending class and trying to make it through. And it was that time where I was having conversation with some of my professors about how can we integrate more social impact design into our curriculum, not just in theory, but also in practice. It's for it to be reflected in maybe earlier studios and also be able to be the projects that we did. And we were learning about Simon Mogby, who had done the rural studio and started building affordable housing in Alabama. So I was really inspired by that. And I remember, telling my professors that, I'm going to start this organization called Ubuntu Design Group, which is based on that fundamental premise. But before that, what had happened was a very interesting conversation. We were out here, I think it was in this studio, where we were talking about mixed-use buildings, and we were already starting to look at how can we integrate low-income communities and low-income families into our mixed-use buildings. And we're looking at different ideas. Maybe the government can sanction that 30% of every mixed-use building in Chicago, in different cities, is low-income. Or maybe there could be tax incentives. And one student raised up their hand and they said, I don't want to mix low and high-income people in my building because I don't want to live with bums. So when you say that statement hurt me. And it was, I think, only when I came to America where I came across this false narrative that people choose to be poor or they need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, when in reality, if they are poor, then they probably don't have boots to pull themselves up by. So I thought he hadn't said it right, but he said it again. And I was hurt. I was hurt because I knew what it meant. I knew what it felt like to not have much. But more importantly, I knew that had life dished me a different deck of cards, I would have easily become that bum that he was talking about. I was hurt because we were judging people based on circumstances that they don't always get to choose. And there was this also underlying narrative, which I've seen, across the architecture field around the world, that low-income housing or low-income urban design or low-income architecture isn't quite architecture. So, frustrated by these, I started Ubuntu Design Group based on this fundamental premise that people living in these informal settlements are some of the most creative individuals in the world. And I wanted to partner with them and use my skills, what I had learned here, to build structures that reflect that creativity, but also reflect the structural integrity which I had learned in this amazing university. So these are some of the conditions of informal settlements in South Africa. As you can tell, these houses are built out of practically everything that these people could find. But what's interesting is that the people living in these communities are the same people who build, our buildings, who build the cafeteria, who build the stadiums in South Africa. So it's not that they don't necessarily have the expertise or that they are lazy. It's just that they do not have the same level of privilege or the same level of resources that we have. And I wanted to change that. So in doing that, we partnered with Andrews University School of Architecture. So Andrew Van Maar reached out to me. He was like, hey, this is what we should be doing. Let's have our master's architecture class, work with Ubuntu in designing and working with the community in Umbumbulu to develop these communities. I think that's probably one of the most significant deals I've ever been able to strike in my life, because that's really helped us move from, I was going to go back to South Africa and just design one home and see how that goes. But Andrew and the Master's Architecture class then gave us the unique opportunity to design the whole neighborhood and look at what that process would look like in community scale. And one of the things we did was to study what already existed. And in South Africa, there's something called Apartheid that happened, which was a racial segregation that penetrated every sphere of life. So from housing to where you could go to the beach, where you could sit, very similar to Jim Crow, but probably worse. So these are apartheid architects designing townships. And in these townships, they made them to be something called the 40-40 rule, where they would build 40 square meters, located 40 kilometers away from the town center. And then that would force people to spend 40% of their time commuting, but also 40% of their income in transportation, which then disincentivized them to be able to develop their own communities. These communities were also devoid of any economic opportunities. These communities were devoid of gathering spaces. And as a result, these were practically labor camps for people to go and work for the apartheid regime and be dependent on them. To take it even a step further, what they did was they built beer halls right next to the work factories, so that as soon as people finished working, they would go and spend all their money drinking in the beer hall and continue to be dependent on the system, which is apartheid architecture. But this is not something that was unique necessarily to South Africa. In America, back in the 1940s and 1950s, there were these projects which were built, which are actually called projects, and some of these places we know as ghettos, where you had these giant towers with a single door in, a single door out, apartment buildings for low-cost housing. And so if any gangs took care of the doors, you'd have a situation where parents didn't feel safe sending their kids out to school. So now you have high dropout rates, you have obesity problems, and then the kids who do go to school end up getting gangs, you've got crime problems. So all of these things sort of starts piling on each other. But this, I'm saying all to show you that how the design of the place can affect how people live. I think Churchill puts it best when he says, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape who we are. So usually when you look at this housing in South Africa or in different places, and then 10 years down the line, these are the communities that have the highest homicide rates, the highest high school dropout rates, the highest pregnancy rates for teenagers. And then we think to ourselves, what is wrong with these people? But in reality, what is wrong with the architects who designed these places? Because these people are just living up to the design. These places have been designed for people to fail. So we set out working with the Andrews School of Architecture to do the opposite of most social impact projects that have been done in history, to do the opposite of apartheid architecture, and to listen to the people. Because one of the three main reasons why we realized all of these had failed was because for some reason when people design low-income communities, they did not consider listening to the people who are actually going to live there. Then number two, they built these homes far away from economic centers, which the only reason why you have shacks and shanty towns is because people want to live closer to economic centers. And then number three, they built them to be boxes, which then deprive people from being able to expand in number, to grow in economy, or to even have a car. So we wanted to do the opposite and listen. This is us engaging with learners from KwaMashu and Umbumbulu. These are high school learners. We made them to be the architects. They were the ones leading the design of their own communities and homes, because we believe no one knows best where they're going to live than the people who are actually going to live there. And I remember they would design, and then we would sit back as the audience, and then they presented to us. And on the right, that's where we have a community meeting with the parents. And then we had a walking tour with the Izindunas, or the local chiefs, who showed us around, and we looked at how people are already solving some of these problems. We went also to meet with the Durban University of Technology architecture students to get a different perspective. So we did a holistic understanding of the community by talking to the different layers of society within that community to be able to produce what best reflects this community. And it was very important and intentional for us to work with young people, because they are the future of these communities, and we did not want them to move to other communities for opportunities, but we wanted them to be able to develop their own communities. Building to enable. Can a house be more than just a house? Could it be an economic engine that enables the family to financially sustain themselves? Can it be a place that doesn't just serve that particular one family, but it serves the whole community? This is one of the renderings which were done by the Andrews University Master's Architecture class. Enable Ubuntu. But at the end of the day, it's really not about the house, nor is it about the commercial space or the church or the street or the school, but it's about all of these pieces coming together to make a whole. And that's what makes a holistic community: the church, the house, the school, the streets, the people, the culture. And that's what we were trying to foster and start a conversation within this community that showcased some of these principles. Could a street be more than just a street? Could it be a dignified place to hang out and spend time in? Could it be a place where people felt safe to walk? Could it be a place for commerce to happen? Could it be a place that has hierarchy, that celebrates the traditional leadership that exists in the community? And that's exactly what we worked on in designing these particular places. Again, could a street or what looks like a abundant bush turn into a place where both multinationals and locals can benefit from the economic fruits of that community, where you could have your Walmart chain, but also you could have a local store that does clothing, or local elders who are going to be selling fruits and vegetables. But I think what's interesting is that when you look at these designs and these schemes, they're not glamorous or huge, but it's just small changes that provide dignity. And it is through that dignity that enables people to fully live to their potential. And it enables opportunities for all. Designing a place that would foster local craftsmanship and enable and create jobs for the locals. I don't know about you, but if I go to Rome, I want to see Roman buildings. And if I go to South Africa, I want to see Zulu traditional African buildings. And we wanted to foster that same notion in creating buildings based on the history and heritage and the local craftsmanship of the people. Could a sitting area be more than just a sitting area? Could a street be more than just a street? Up front there, that's where the old ladies would go and get their pension. And so once a month, this is like a buzzing street, and people would like lay tiles and sell stuff here. So since that's already happening, how can we enable it to happen in a more dignified place, but also just enable that opportunity for more people to be able to do that? And that's exactly what we're doing here. Same thing with the street. The learners told us that there were a lot of car accidents that happened here because this is like a main thoroughfare leading to game reserves in Pietermaritzburg, which is the next town. So what we did was we designed a place that forced cars to slow down when they get to that intersection, a place that became an oasis, a place that became an ecotourism spot where people would want to go and spend money, and that money would stay within the community, a place that is built on local Zulu traditions, but also, as you can see, the circular Zulu pattern, and it has a skills development center for learners to be able to learn skills such as bricklaying and agriculture and plow back to their community. So this all started with me engaging this one family, and that is the Mthiyane family. So basically, the Mthiyane family was a family that lived in a mud brick shack that fell due to light rainstorms. And because of that, what happened was they were living in a borrowed room, and that room was so small that they had to send away their 15-year-old son to go live with relatives. So we came in, and one of the missions of the project was to design and actually build an Ubuntu home with a commercial space for this family. So you remember the student raised up their hand and they said they don't want to live next to bums? Do you remember? Well, that student came down with us to South Africa. And it was beautiful to see the change of heart and perspective that happened with him. He was emotional when he told us how this project had fundamentally changed his perspective and how he viewed architecture. He started realizing that architecture has the potential to change people's lives, regardless of their socioeconomic status. He moved from a lead detractor to the lead designer of the home that you're about to see. He's the one who championed really the design and the look of this home that you see today. And that was beautiful because it reminded me of a Zulu phrase that says, "Umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu," and that is, I am because we are. Sorry, a person is a person because of other people. Tempo was about to correct me. And that's based out of the Zulu concept of Ubuntu, which means I am because we are. And it is when we start seeing ourselves in others that we start seeing people. We start seeing resilience. We start seeing dignity. We start seeing beauty. And we stop seeing bums. We stop seeing lazy. We stop seeing poor. So I'm excited to tell you that Mrs. Mthiyane is now living in this home. They are running a daycare out of the home because Mrs. Mthiyane had worked at a daycare for 10 years. This house was built for 6 kids, but right now they have 18 kids, which is probably not according to code, but they've over tripled their income. To put this into perspective for you, this means 18 mothers can now go to work as they send their kids to school. And they now live with their 15-year-old son. In many ways, when I look at this project, I feel like it's changed us, the participants of it, more than it's changed the family and their experience. Currently, what we're working on right now, we're working to build 30 of these homes and scale it across South Africa and create a micro-mortgage system that will enable families to financially sustain themselves, pay off their homes, and pay it forward. So we're pivoting from just being an architecture firm, but also looking at being a microfinance firm. So one of the unintended consequences of this project, which is really beautiful, to me was we had students from various backgrounds come and help us, and students from affluent neighborhoods and not so affluent neighborhoods. In South Africa, that usually goes along racial lines due to the history of apartheid. So we had white students from this university, University of KwaZulu-Natal, come and help us. And as they were building, they would pull me aside and say, you know, we wouldn't otherwise even drive by this neighborhood because of what we've been told. We've been told we're not welcome here. We've been told this place is not safe, but we've never felt more safe. We've never felt more at home. We love being here. And that wasn't one of our intentions for this project. But it was interesting, again, that when people start seeing themselves in others, they start seeing dignity, they start seeing value. They start realizing that we are more alike than we are different. And then going back and closing this conversation to this idea of daily leadership and how I got to be a part of the Obama Foundation. I did this project with Andrews. I left for a year. I think 2017, I spent the year building this house. Probably one of the hardest things that has ever happened in my life. Took several months longer than we anticipated. Smith knows the process and how frustrating everything was. Struggled with the contractor. There's something called contingency fees in architecture. And basically what contingency fees are, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is if something changes within the initial design and something has to be added, so more money is needed. But so and this usually comes from the architects, from what I understand. But the contractor kept on saying, hey, there's contingency fees, there's contingency fees. So this house ended up being a lot more expensive than we had budgeted and than we had anticipated. I was frustrated. I remember coming back, I think it was like 75% done. And then I woke up one morning, I was just like so stressed and sort of going to the edge of depression with everything that was going on. And I told myself, I was like, man, I can't do this anymore. So I booked my next flight to America and left and came back to come and finish my master's, which my professors weren't sure whether or not I'm coming back. And then I was like, to finish this house, I'll just have to correspond and try and leverage the little influence that I have for the contractor to do it. So I was out here just frustrated and depressed. I had probably one of my hardest semesters. I had gone through a lot of loss in my life personally. So I was just trying to find why is this even important when the whole reason why I was doing it and like the people who would influence me had gone. So that was tough, and I finished that year. We went to Puerto Rico. We did this amazing project that you see out here, which was a huge struggle for me because I honestly hated architecture again at this point. I was just like, I just didn't want to do anything. I couldn't do anything. And I graduated, went back to South Africa in October last year. Just to put everything to perspective, I went to South Africa in October last year, lived with my sister, and she'd come back every day and say, hey, my friend owns an architecture firm and they're looking for people. I was like, I don't want to work there. And then she'd come back the next day. It's like, oh, I met this developer. They're looking for people. I was like, no, I don't want to do that. Because I had this vision and mission to use architecture as a vehicle to bring about change within low-income communities. But I wasn't also just sitting in my sister's house and doing nothing. I doubled down. I was studying and looking at where I'd gone wrong and where I'd failed. And at this point, all my friends had graduated a year before me. Everyone was involved in this project was gone. I was just left alone. So I started looking at what failed, what works, how can we move this forward. I started applying for the Obama Foundation Summit. I started writing a chapter of a book that sort of tells the story of how this whole happened. I was working with Stephen Alacock and finishing a film, which is what you saw as the trailer. So I just doubled down and worked really hard in all of these things. And from October to November, I think this was like one of the most frustrating times of my life where I just like had nothing. And then in December, things started popping up. I was selected as one of the Nelson Mandela top 100 young leaders to celebrate Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday. And so I was invited to the Global Citizen. I was also made a TEDx Johannesburg Fellow. Got to meet Beyonce and all these cool people. So that was like a glimmer of an Usher. That was a glimmer of hope for me because I was like, man, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe there's still hope in the work that we're doing. So to get that affirmation, to get that recognition was the first springboard. And then I was featured on the Envision magazine cover on the work that I'm doing. So I flew in and came here last April. But again, things didn't start coming together until that April where I then got a rejection letter from the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which I was very surprised by. fellowship, and then like 2 days later, I got an acceptance into the Obama Foundation Leaders Program. Out of 25,000 applicants around the world, I was one of the 200 that made the cut. And so that opened a lot of doors. And around that same time, a guy who I knew from Andrews had connected me to someone in Australia. And that person in Australia, I'd been talking to him for a year. And that dude was born in South Africa, grew up in Australia, was running businesses in Australia. But he had a friend who also born in South Africa, grew up in Australia, was now running businesses in Durban. So he connected me to that guy. And then we started talking, and turns out that guy was running a company that sources out sort of CSR money or something called BEE in South Africa to help develop social impact projects. So that dude was amazed. We had a book at this point. We had a film that I showed him. So like within the first meeting, they were like, yo, this is crazy. We want to get involved. We want to fund the next house. And that's how the next house is funded. And from then onwards, they've channeled a lot of the funds that they get out of these corporate companies towards our work. And now we share an office, so they've sort of become a patron in helping us develop our work, and they really have been tremendous help around this time. And then due to the platform with the Obama Foundation, they said, well, we're going to have an Obama Summit, but out of the 400 Obama leaders, we only need 5 that are going to come over, so nominate each other. So I was like, oh man, that's crazy. So that's probably not going to happen. So I just forgot about that, but some people who I had met who were doing amazing things as part of the Obama Foundation nominated me. I went through an interview process, and somehow I was one of the 5 leaders to get invited to Chicago. But not only that, I ran a session in Chicago where I was talking about how to shape places that foster gathering, that foster people coming together, that enable. And that's how I was able to be in a panel with some of my architecture heroes that I studied with. I'm saying all this to say that it took 3 years for all of this to happen. Like, we did the book and finished it in 2016, for the most part. And we built the house. I started building the house in 2016 and was finished it up, I think, in 2017. No one cared about our book or much of the house, till 2019. But when the opportunity came in 2019, we were ready. We had a book, we had a film, we had a house, we had a model, we had a business plan. We've got teams, we're working with a financial institution. And I'm answering the question on how do you do it? On how does this all happen? And this is the question I get a lot. It happens by sheer resilience and struggle, by being able to sit in your sister's house and sweep the floors for a good 8 months before anything really comes up. And now, I'm flying to New York next week at the Harvard Club and talk about our work, and meeting with Bill and Todd, the architects who are designing the Obama Foundation, and looking at collaboration opportunities. We're looking to design and build more social and affordable housing and social impact architecture across Africa. And it's only now that people are recognizing. So if you're sitting there and you're looking at the conventional way of architecture and you feel like it doesn't represent your values, it doesn't affect the 90% of the world that you want to affect, I guess my advice for you is not to give up, but also to just be resilient in the process and be patient in the process, because there's progress in the process. And I guess my last point is, architecture is really just a frame, and people are the big picture. And I'm just using architecture as one of the vehicles to highlight the beauty, the dignity, the creativity of people who live in informal settlements. Thank you.
All right, so we'll take some time for questions. If people have questions for Wandile and what he's been doing, what we talked about today. Paula.
First, thank you, Wandile, for coming back to your alma mater and taking the time to talk with us. I do have a question. I'm wondering who your architectural influences have been, because as I've been listening to your presentation, which you've expanded since we were in Peru,
Yeah.
so you didn't have as much time. I think we were done like 15 or 20 minutes in Peru.
And my Spanish wasn't that great either, you know?
And you had interpreters as well. I'm just curious, because as we've been going through ARC 150, just this week have been studying, of course, Christopher Alexander and his kind of rejection of postmodernism and his ideas that, I mean, if we just look at the San Jose homeless shelter, right, that he built that he did in 1990, where he talks about interviewing many, many homeless people before he even started designing, right? It aligns, in my mind, with what you're promoting now, 30 years later, of course, in a different country, right? But who have been your architectural influences that have helped shape your framework?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, but I think, to be honest, to start off, these guys are my architectural influences first, right? I mean, I could mention Christopher Alexander and all these people, but I did not spend nearly as much. I've never met Christopher Alexander, but I've met y'all. So I think y'all are my number one architectural influences in everything that I know. I definitely read a lot of the pattern language when I feel stuck. And I think Christopher Alexander is one of the great architects who saw things in very similar ways that I see. But again, I only got to know about Christopher Alexander through you guys. So in many ways, a lot of what I do is based on some of the lessons and the principles that I learned here. And my biggest challenge right now is imagining what African architecture would look like had colonization not happened and it was allowed to evolve till today. So that's really what I'm trying to sort of draw lessons from right now and see. Because when you look at African architecture, traditional African architecture, it's sustainable. The materials are right there, readily available, so it's cost effective, etc. And right now we're talking about carbon footprints and all these things. If colonization hadn't happened in Africa, we wouldn't be having that conversation because everything was locally sourced, etc., etc. How can we then draw from those same principles, but we can't do the same huts as they lived in back in the day? I think even Shaka Zulu would be angry if he woke up and saw us living in the same buildings that they did. But what would it look like today? I think that's the biggest challenge that Ubuntu Design Group as a firm is looking to do, which there's no precedence for the most part. And there's people who are trying some of these, trying to answer some of these questions, such as Francis Kerere, who's doing some work in Africa. And so I'm looking at that. I think Mass Design Group is also trying. It's really, a new space that we're in. I hope that answers your questions.
And I don't want to monopolize the questions, but just as a follow-up to this particular build project, as I talk about it on tours, right?
Yeah.
Because you can, it's out here in our hallway.
Yeah.
Has
made the Hall of Fame.
Has there been any government response to this? Because it was my understanding when you were piloting this, or kind of showing this as a potential, right? I know that the commerce component, right, the daycare, was not going to be competitive in terms of competing with what government subsidized housing would offer. But has there been any interest by the government to consider this as a prototype? Because I thought, if I remember right, maybe I'm not remembering right, I thought that was part of it.
That was one of the initial intentions, yeah. No, I agree. That's the right premise. So yeah, that was the initial intention, to sort of work with the government and scale it, because they have sort of the resources to just do it on a huge scale. However, if you know anything about government, it's very volatile. It depends on elections and how that goes down. So what happened was, I think our initial sort of plug to the government got ousted, the mayor. So a new mayor came in, so we didn't have the same level of relationship with them. But that mayor just also got kicked out. So there's a new... Oh man, government is interesting. So there's a new mayor, and I have a meeting with them as soon as I get back to South Africa. But they seem cool and they're interested. But now also we have Obama's name behind us, so it's a lot easier. So we'll see how that goes.
Have you ever thought about becoming mayor?
supposed to ask that question. His story that Obama relayed about don't think about who you want to be, but what you want to do.
I like that. Thanks for the comeback.
Do you have any projects coming up, and would you work outside of the social?
Yes. Actually, we've got some exciting stuff coming up. I think we just got like our first big-ish project. It's a $150,000 project to design a daycare. So these kids are currently in a daycare with just 2 rooms, and it's very crowded, and it's 60 kids. So we're designing a dignified, suitable daycare for them. And again, the dude I told you about is funding that particular project. So we have a little bit of leverage where we can start looking at opportunities and then source funding. That's kind of how we're getting our projects. We're creating projects. So that's one. And then we might have a project in Angola through one of the Obama leaders who leads a foundation for special needs kids. So we might be building a center for kids with autism there. And then we are working on our next home, which is a Ngobo home. But it's taking longer because we're creating it in such a way that we can replicate it for other contexts as we build the next 30 homes, which we're trying to raise $1 million to build 30 homes. We are partnering with the financial institution so that they can handle our mortgages, since that's not our expertise. So we've had to pivot towards sort of that financial arm, because we can draw all day and have books about our work, but so long as we can't make it happen feasibly and financially, that doesn't work. So we're learning a lot. But yeah.
So having studied here in the U.S. and being like somewhat familiar with the environment here, what are your visions for Ubuntu Design Group here? Do you have any plans to expand overseas and come here to work in conditions similar to the ones that you experienced back home?
Yeah, great point. Actually, right now we're working with one of our team members who's based out here to build a... So Ubuntu Design Group is the umbrella, and then it has different arms. There's Ubuntu Architecture, that's the work that we're doing. They design and build all this stuff. And then there's Ubuntu Home, which is the financial engine, which is the micro mortgage lending part. And then there's Ubuntu Nonprofit, which helps us fund the free projects. Like if we were to build a free home, that's not necessarily part of the micro mortgage. So now we're working on building a Ubuntu Design Group nonprofit 501c3 in America that's going to sort of work with this one. So we're looking at that, but one of the key things is obviously learning from these principles, because again, the challenges you're seeing in South Africa with affordable housing, etc., are not unique to South Africa. I was in Southside Chicago, they're struggling with some of those things, but maybe higher density and Benton Harbor, Detroit, etc. So there's a lot of challenges out there. So we're trying to test out these models in South Africa and see what principles we can draw and bring this side.
So a lot of our students ask about how can we do some stuff like this when we're done, right? Like how can you be involved in this kind of work, whether it's low-cost housing or special needs kind of based projects. And it'd be interesting to hear what your take is on like what kind of advice do you give students, and what does it really take? You graduate after 5 years of being here. Students often have a certain amount of debt.
Yeah.
There's sort of the conventional architecture route, right? Like going into the profession, working for firms. I don't know. What do you usually tell people who are interested in doing this?
Good question. I think similar to question what I was getting in Notre Dame. I think number one, the struggle is real, right? You gotta pay the bills. Your parents paid a lot of money for you to be out here, so they expect certain things from you guys. And you have student loans. I think I need to first acknowledge my privilege. There's a privilege, there's a privilege of not having much, right? So I came in, I did not have the expectations from my parents, right? I did not have the student loans because I got a full scholarship to study here. And so in many ways, I could just do whatever I wanted to do. So, and I understand that's not all of your guys' realities. So you guys have, I mean, I had my sisters and stuff, but it was not nearly as harsh as some of those conditions. So I just want to acknowledge that, you know, we have unique situations that we have to deal with, and they're real. And again, sort of similar to Obama, and not running away from the questions, like there's no clear path on how to go about it. But my only advice is, if you're really convicted to do work like this, just start doing it. And that's what I did here. When I was doing my 4th year studio, I just started designing this stuff, and I started putting myself up to competitions at One Young World, and the next thing we were at the United Nations, and then South by Southwest, and I had to be vulnerable. I had to compete with kids from Harvard and Yale, and eventually won, etc. But that takes a lot of God's faith and believing in what you're trying to do. So I think it starts by convincing yourself. If you can convince yourself that you can do it, then you're good. But if you're going to wait for other people's affirmation, if I was like, I'm waiting for Troy to tell me that I can do this, probably wouldn't have happened. You know what I mean? Not that Troy wouldn't tell me. Now he's telling me. He's late. That's what I'm saying. If you convince yourself, right, and then sort of plow through, but also you guys could always, reach out to me as well at the easiest way is like my old email, wandile@andrews.edu. That transfers to my email, so we could always talk about that. But I say, start with yourself and just plow through. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. I think Candice had a hand. Irina. And then Jordan.
I know when you were a student here, you were heavily involved in the Architecture Student Association here. Yeah, AIS. How have those connections you made to that organization benefited you post-grad?
Smart question. So very important. I spoke at the Young Architects Conference this year, led by a dude called Michael Risika. And I met Mike at an AIS conference where I was running for national elections, which I had lost. But we stayed in touch since then. And at that time, he had written a book because he had failed the license for 5 years or something like that, something crazy, and eventually passed it. So he was writing a guide to how to pass the ARE architecture exams. And then since then, this was 2015, he's blown up. He's like running the Young Architects empire. He's got a podcast, he's got that book, he's got the Young Architects Conference. He runs a boot camp where people across the country sign up to be taught by him and his staff how to pass the architecture license exam. And because of that connection I made there, I've been part of the architecture boot camp practically for free. Through him, I was part of the podcast when it started. I was the keynote speaker at his Young Architects Conference. So it's like, you see, look around these guys. Those are your connections, and those are the people that you need to stick with and come up with. So any opportunity you can get to get involved, both within the architecture department, within the school, within AIS, get involved. It's those relationships that are able to sort of take you to the next level. And I think another very important thing that I did was, and AIS helped me do this, to step out of sort of the conventional Andrews bubble or Adventist bubble and start talking to people from other worlds and start competing in other contexts, which really opened my mind to a lot of things and allowed me to have opportunities in other areas and to be able to influence certain things. So I definitely encourage you guys getting involved in different ways.
How has this journey that you've been on, affirmed your faith, tested your faith,
Yeah.
I mean, clearly you've had challenges.
A lot.
So, how about your relationship with God? Did you move through this, process?
That's a hard question. I would say it's been rough because, when you're, sitting 8 months at your sister's house having nothing to do and trying to make this vision and reality come through, and it's just not working out. You don't understand why, especially when you believe that in many ways you're trying to do what God has called us to do. And so that was challenging to me, because I'm like, man, if God has called us to serve the poor and all this stuff, that's exactly what I'm doing, but he's not showing up. But also then him showing up eventually when you're like on the brink of giving up. And then looking back in retrospect, I'm like, man, maybe I needed that, right? But like all of you guys, I wish we didn't have to go through that 8 months or 3 years before everyone starts paying attention to what we're doing. We wish we could just like jump into that. But in many ways, I think it builds a certain level of resilience, a certain level of, I appreciate sort of what I have and more. And you get a lot of people who are like, oh, stay humble or remember to be humble and all those things. But that really doesn't apply to you, because you know the struggle of what it takes in all of these parts. That's just them projecting their own insecurities onto you. So it's been a rough journey. It's really, there's a direct correlation to what was happening and where my relationship with God was. But I think the key though is, I guess I didn't give up on God, but what I did was kept asking why and questioning and pushing harder. And now I'm here, and I don't think I've made it in any way, but I'm starting to see the grander plan. Like, so this is where we're going. Oh, okay, so this is what it is.
What was the response of the community, like the local people who were watching as you kind of put up this building, and you feel like what were some of their responses and some of their hopes as you shared your vision with them?
So there's a couple. I think one, I'll start on the race issue, where we had the white students build with us, and the community also came up to us. They're like, man, we didn't know these people could come and work with us and be in the same vicinity with us. We thought they are better, and they couldn't hold the same brick as us. So it changed perspectives on both ends. So that was beautiful too. That was an unintended impact. But the community was very happy about this home, because they know the struggle of the Charlie family. And now the community gets to send their kids at a walking distance to a daycare versus having to put them in an unsafe taxi where there's a lot of car accidents. So it's been, I think what's the key to doing projects like this is to get community buy-in. How does your project not just benefit one person, but also benefit the community at large? And I think that's what this house did.
All right, any last questions? Otherwise, I'm so grateful that you came. Wandile, thank you for coming. And let's give her one last hand.